Ladies and gentlemen, the session will begin shortly. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, the session will now begin. Please take your seats.
Technological innovation is a two-edged sword. It improves productivity and welfare across the globe, but it can also be job-destroying and disruptive in many ways in the short run. Over long periods, technological innovation that takes the form of automation replaces less skilled workers with machines and can contribute to persistent and widening income inequality. Extracting the large benefits of technological innovation while mitigating its disruptive effects constitutes one of the great policy challenges of our time. What major forms of technological advance should we expect over the next 20 years? What effects are likely on welfare and inequality? What should governments do to improve the effects of technological change, especially on the less privileged?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our moderator for the Technology, Welfare and Inequality session, Manager of Social Strategy at NBC-owned television stations, Sarah Glover.
Everyone, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Everyone awake? Yes. I'm excited to join you here at the Atlantic Dialogues. It's a wonderful time and a really engaging conversation this morning with some fabulous panelists. First, I would like to call to the stage Bruno Boccara. He is the founder of Socio-Analytic Dialogue. Bruno. And then next, Serigne Diop. He is the Minister Advisor to the President of the Republic of the Mayor of Sandiara of Senegal. Good to see you. Yes, you may sit. And then next, Sunjoy Joshi, Chairman, Observer Research Foundation of the ORF. And then last, María Teresa Fernández de la Vega, President, Council of State of Spain, President, Women for Africa Foundation. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is a really, really, really important conversation, is it not? Technology is certainly the future, from the cell phones and our mobile devices and iPads that we use every day just to function. And we're going to unpack how technology impacts not just today and the way that we communicate, but the future. And not only technology as a science, but technology as a thing that mobilizes communities and countries and policy. And I thought we could just jump right in. And we're going to first unpack the elements of psychosocial and how psychology and sociology and thinking can actually impact technology. So I'd like for you to maybe explain to us a little bit about psychosocial technology. What is that? And how does that impact technology today and into the future?
Sure. So I'm first going to make a few general points about what it means to think from a psychosocial perspective. Anything that provides a link between members of a society, whether it's an exogenous shock, a policy, or in this case, technology, calls for an analysis, what I call above the surface and below the surface. What's the surface? The surface is what separates the social conscious. That's usually where policymakers, politicians are. That's where the media are. That's where, in an illusion, all the demonstration and dialogue in a society takes place. And then below the surface is the hidden. It's the psychosocial aspects, some unconscious, some still conscious. This is where, in many ways, the action is. Why? Because this is unknown, and this is often forgotten. Of course, a big mistake would be to only be below the surface. In other words, only think about psychosocial aspects. The same way, a mistake that I think has been costly up until now has been to systematically approach policies or dialogue from a position of above the surface. So now, in my case, we're going to try to go below the surface. In other words, think psychosocially. Think psychosocially is not enough. It also needs to be done, since we're talking about a society, from a systems dynamic perspective, in other words, general equilibrium. So I'm going to make a small point, and then I'm going to jump into technology, and only have 2 points on technology. The first point, which may seem abstract, is I do not believe we can approach anything unless we're comfortable, unless we're willingly enter what I call the position, the state of not knowing. Often, in particular in policy circles, we assume or we position ourselves as if we knew, as if we had the answer. But time and time tells, usually we do not, because there are so many uncertainties. Now, by positioning ourselves as I have an answer, or I have the answer, it also implies that whoever may be across the table and may disagree doesn't have the answer. Whereas if we enter, if we adopt a state of not knowing, which is something very common in psychoanalytic session, then we already start the debate, we already start asking questions as if nobody knew. The implication is that there is, by definition, will be empathic listening, willingness to hear the other side, because we position ourselves as if, although we may believe that we know, as if nobody knew. So that's a position of not knowing. I believe it's absolutely crucial in almost anything we do. It's also a position of humbleness. So now let me jump into technology. Point 1. That's mostly social media. Parenthesis, I do a lot of work, obviously, on psychosocial issues, including in Morocco. I haven't really worked, of course, I'm impacted by it every day, on technology per se. So if you want, I'm putting myself in that not knowing state. So point 1, technology, in particular social media, increases the demand, increases the wish for narcissistic gratification. We all know this. Or we all probably felt this, and this is something I've heard. One of the groups I work with in Morocco is a school of coders, a very impressive school called 1337, a member of School 42, and they've certainly expressed that point. Now, to wish narcissistic gratification, one would say, so what? The problem is when there is an increased demand for narcissistic gratification, it's likely that there'll be an increased propensity for relationship between individuals, relationship between individual and organization, and even a relationship between individuals and the state, if not actually the entire planet, parenthesis, that's climate change, to be narcissistically driven. To be, if you want, when transactions are narcissistically driven, the objects of narcissistic gratification is not recognized as a full object. It's only an object to be used for one's pleasure. when you have that kind of state, you tend to have perverse societal dynamics, corruption, and so on. So I believe technology is a jump in an unknown that's going to dramatically or is dramatically altering the wish for narcissistic gratification and therefore the inability to consider the other as a true object. Point one. Point two, what's happening in the world today? In a nutshell, if I only had 2 words to characterize my environment, I would say meaninglessness and futurelessness. Now, we've been there before, so it's not like suddenly today we say, oh my God, it's meaningless and it's futurelessness. No. During the first industrial revolution, and I've looked at a lot of history reports and how families were broken and increase in all type of psychological disorder, there's really a feeling at the time, at least what's being reported now, of the death of a way of life. So that's not new. We've been there, we're back, we're here, in the death of a way of life, but something is drastically different. For the first time, and including, of course, because of technology, we're very integrated, all information is shared. Anything that happens, a shock somewhere, has the ability to be transmitted, usually very fast, somewhere else. We face, and there's a lot of talk now about it, something called climate change, global warming. In other words, there's something that it's very hard to define. It's really an annihilation anxiety. And that's changed drastically because such an anxiety, it's going to immediately call for a response. That response is called denial. Remember, with general equilibrium, social system, so not denial for one person, collusive denial. So now we're in a society where we need to protect ourselves from a risk that we can't really quantify. And as a result of collusive denial, this amplifies again the perverse dynamics where you have accomplices and you try to kind of shield yourself. Where does technology come in? It comes back as a helper. Technology can also be a defense, an illusion. What's the anxiety that leads to collusive denial? It's, I do not know. There's something I do not know, something so frightening that I risk losing omnipotence. Now, in a psychoanalytic world, when you lose omnipotence, think of the young baby, things go really wrong. At the level of the baby, it's just going to be a lot of crying. At the level of a large group or the entire planet losing omnipotence, it's not going to look like a little bit of crying. It's look something far uglier and part of what we see today. So that loss of omnipotence will be accompanied by all kind of defense. What's the defense? I don't know. I'm terrified. I lose my omnipotence. I need to find something which is going to conclude, I know. Technology, in part, of course, it has a lot of the solutions to what we're facing, can be that something can be used defensively as an illusion to restore omnipotence. And I'll close with a last and concluding point, because in also the session description, there was a link, which may not be clear. Maybe that link was because I was one of the speakers. What's happening worldwide? Suddenly everybody is in the street, they make a lot of noise, and what used to be only Arab Spring, what people thought, maybe it's going to be Arab Spring 2.0, now it's worldwide 2.0. So worldwide 2.0 is a little bit scarier, and my belief in a nutshell of what's happening, we talked about narcissistic denial, restoring omnipotence, and that's the anxiety of not knowing. I think right now what's happening is what I call an anxiety of not belonging. So there is, and that really explains what's happening in the world, there's a building of what I call the narcissistic fortress, where those that belong can get in. Belonging, so the feeling of omnipotence, of validation, is validated by those that are not in. Exclusion is fundamental to restoring omnipotence. Now, if you're excluded, how do you think it's going to feel? If you want the answer, go in Bogota, go in Beirut, go in Santiago. So in a nutshell, to conclude, I believe that technology has a propensity to increase the use of one another as narcissistic object, to be used defensively as an elusive tool to restore omnipotence, and one of the conclusion may be some of the fraction that we see today and the resulting violence. Thank you.
Thank you. That was such an important, insightful journey that you just took us on, because I think so often when we have these conversations around technology, we immediately jump in to talk about what that is specifically, AI, artificial intelligence, whether it be the actual devices that we use or the platforms that we're using to communicate our messages, such as social media. So thank you for taking us on to start this journey to talk about us as people, right? And so how we as people manage technology is just as important as the technology, and also how we respond to it. And this pool of anxiety that technology can bring, not just about how to use technology and if you have the capacity to understand technology, but that you are, no matter which way you turn, it is going to have an impact on you, and it can actually make you anxious, which is not always a good thing. So technology is good and bad, is it not? Yes. So the title of our panel, interestingly, Technology, Welfare, and Inequality. So you were able to tap welfare in a very unique and boisterous way. And we have this esteemed panel up here with a great conversation. So I wanted to move then into the science of technology. And Mr. Diop, you can give us some insights on the science of how technology is impacting our society today, in agriculture, and in economy, in politics. Give us a little bit of insight how technology is working for the good of communities, and how science is at that intersection.
Thank you very much. We would like to, first of all, congratulate people from the Atlantic Dialogue to put together all these different experts, and this is really a very important happening in Africa. As a scientist, actually, I see technology as opportunity. If you remember the revolution, industrial revolution, all the countries before the Industrial Revolution were at the same level of development. It's only after that, in the years 1905, that you can see development of Europe going very high, much higher than the development from the other part of the world. And today, thanks to technology, China had today reached overpassed even the United States of America. And this will continue. So for me, as a scientist, this is more opportunity. If you look at the impact of science, the impact of biology, biotechnology in agriculture, it was tremendous. Today we know the genes that are influencing yield today. We know the genes that are influencing protein content in plant, in beans. We know today how to grow milk production from 20 liters to 40, 50 liters today, because we know those genes. Today, in gene therapy, you can also heal a lot of disease today. This is increasing. In genetics, we know today what influences all these diseases, cancer, the disease of Alzheimer's disease, all this type of disease today, we know how they are explained today. We know also that in seeds technology, how from seed you can increase really yield by 10 times, just because we know how to create new seeds, particularly for Africa, in the field of cereals, in the field of also animal and breeding. And this is very important for us, because in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, remember that the problem is still food availability, food quality, nutrition, undernutrition. And this, for me, we must always, when we are in this forum, think about the two sides of technology. The one today that is more on IT technology, on robot technology, artificial intelligence, that is growing, which is a very good thing. It can have impact on employment, but for me, this is the world. The world must evolve from technology, influenced by technology. But from the developing world, it's different. It's opportunity, actually. For example, when I come back to Senegal, to Rwanda, today we see things like drones helping actually to know what is the level of the need of water for irrigation. We know how with drones you can also deliver some fertilizer, you can deliver some part for a car, for a tractor. So this is becoming more and more important. The other thing that is very important also we have seen in Kenya, in Senegal, in Nigeria, is the IT, the telephone cellular, the airtime, and also the inclusion, financial inclusion because of cell phones. Today, from the cell phone, you can see thousands of young people, I would say even 100,000 of young people having employment, because today they use the technology to transfer money, they use the technology to have also call centers, to work in call centers, and this is very, very important. And also the circular economy. I think technology is also a unique tool for financial inclusion for women. And this is very important also in Africa, where today banking can be done just from a cell phone for women selling fish, selling fruit, selling whatever. Today you can also just from your cell phone know what is the best price, where you can have the best price for your fish, for your raw material, for your vegetable and so on. Then I think this is the reason why we need actually to develop technology. I think one of the best ways where Africa is really lacking behind is on knowledge, on science and technology. That's why I think rather than giving, assisting Africa to in food programs, in financial programs, the best way to help Africa actually is to have access to science, access to technology, access to education for women, for young people in the rural area and so on. I would also just talk about the influence on technology, on welfare. This is also another area where actually we need to reinforce by all means the development of technology in the developing world, because this has a direct impact on social being, on well-being, where people increase their overall income, their home income. And this is very important, because as soon as people master technology, as soon as they can have it as a tool, you can see the income increasing. It means the social needs will be actually just be increasing as well, but at the same time they are becoming autonomous. And this is the reason why in Senegal we have a big program we call Plan Senegal Emergent, which has three axes. One is the industrial restructuration of the economy. It's very important that we look at how we can really, using technology, develop agriculture, industry, infrastructure, IT, a plan for digitalization. We had another axis we call human capital, which is how to develop knowledge, how to develop people with new knowledge, engineers, the medical doctors, and so on, how we can really make sure that our state, African government, invests a lot in universities, in vocational training, in highly oriented, economy-oriented education. So this is really our second axe. And now the third one, which is very important, is really talking about governance, about good governance and social inclusion. And we had big programs that we are testing. One is called the PUDC, where really we would like to make sure that everything is available to really improve the social welfare in the different part of the areas. And once again, technology to have clean water is used. Technology to have fast roads, to have access to very remote areas is also used. And that's the reason why I think there's a very close relationship between impact technology today, as it is in all the field, agriculture, industry, medical field, and plant science, medical science, and so on, and also the welfare. And I will also just talk about how technology can also reduce inequality. In many countries in the world, we have seen that access to technology immediately can help to reduce poverty. Because as soon as you start having technology, it means that your productivity as human is just increasing. It can go very fast, 10 times, 20 times, because in 8 hours you can do more than what you used to do and the typical example I'm using always is agriculture, working time. Today in agriculture, we're working in Africa around 400 hours per year instead of 2,000 hours per year. And this is mainly due to the fact that we don't master the technology of water, of boreholes, of irrigation. So as soon as we master the technology of irrigation, it means that we're going to be able to work out of the rainy season, work 8 hours, 8 months more, 1,400 hours more for 8 million people in Senegal. This just can bring $8 billion just in the GDP of a country like Senegal or Mali. So I believe that the technology, once again, in the field of information technology, has also a bright future. I think we all know this money digitalization is coming from Kenya. It has been developed in Kenya a lot, and we can see the impact in terms of employment. So all the problems we're facing in Africa, diseases, unemployment, poverty, undernutrition, one of the solutions actually is really mastering the technology and is going back to the fundamentals, which is access, universal access to technology. One, of course, can have a fear on what will happen if people are replaced by robots. What will happen if intelligence develop to make more occupy or replace people in the... But for me, this is not really the right question. The right question is how governance can equilibrate. We as ministers, as state presidents or members of the parliament, we must now just try to equilibrate the impact of technology. Of course, it can favor maybe the white collars, it can favor CEOs and so on, but we must really see how we can balance it by taxes, by having very strong welfare program for the poor people. I can see that also in Europe, in Boston, in Latin America, everywhere. You hear these inequalities. But you cannot really talk about capitalism without inequalities. It goes together. But I think it's up now to governance, decision makers like us, to make sure that we boost technology, we invest a lot on it, and I think that should be the priority in Africa. We must put billions of dollars to build school, to build the university, to equip our laboratories with the latest technology in IT, in mechanic, in agriculture, in bioscience, and so on. But at the same time, make sure that it is used by the wide part of the population, that the impact of the science on the population is really very, very positive. So I think this is really what I wanted just to talk about as an introduction. And I believe that if you don't pay attention to inequality, this can be a big problem. I can just give 3 examples. First of all, with South Africa, where just because of access to technology, access to wealth, create this year. And the others was, of course, Tunisia, where we saw that also when technology and wealth is not very well shared, this become also a big problem. Yes. We have seen that in Egypt and many other countries. So this is really the reason why I think the 3 key words here, technology, welfare, and inequality, must really draw our attention for all of us, scientists, policymakers, all the people really who are involved in development for today and tomorrow. We must really pay attention to that, and including now the United States, the World Bank, the African Development Bank. I think we need to see where do we put the money. And I must say that if I had to take a decision, I would put 30 to 40% of the wealth today in education, in mastering technology, in mastering science, in making sure that in all the part of the world, Asia, Africa, and so on, we have technology available and used with a positive impact on people's life.
This was an excellent summary how technology impacts every facet of life, and really appreciate that clear application. You would be a phenomenal, and are a phenomenal, reasonable conscious of why investment is needed. So it's interesting that you ended on that note, because as you were speaking, that's immediately what I thought about, is how important governance is to this conversation and the investment in technology. So thank you for that overview, and it's actually a terrific segue to the welfare that we're going to get a little bit further in, and talking about work. Right? And how technology not only impacts work, but is at the core of productivity. And if you could talk a little bit then now, Sunjoy, about the impact of productivity, the impact of work, and how technology is impacting us now favorably, and what that looks like heading into the future.
Thank you. It's always been a pleasure being at the Atlantic Dialogue, just because of the sheer diversity of debate that this platform brings. I've really enjoyed the comments of my predecessors, and I'd like to take on from both what Bruno said and the Minister said. Let me first start with the idea of collusive denial, which society gets into. I come from a country which in the 1970s, this comes to issues of governance also, which the Minister spoke about, a country which in the 1970s set up a parliamentary committee to go into the issue of computerization. And the recommendation was that computers are job destroying, they should not be introduced, and therefore India said no to IBM. India said no to every technology change which computers would bring. And the result was that we lost about 20 years in the process. Then we started to play catch up. And then when we started to play catch up, within 5 years, India transformed the country which said no to computers, transformed itself into a country which then came to be known as the IT power, the information technology power of the world. It came to be known as the Info Nation. Now, that is a whole story as to how India grew. And the dramatic story about India, the paradox about India's growth was that in this process of growth, India completely skipped for about 10 years the cycle of export-led manufacturing growth, which the rest of the developing world, including countries like Japan, the Asian tigers, and China, had ridden to prosperity. 63% of India's growth came from IT-enabled technology services. That is during the miracle years when India was growing very fast. Now, people like talking about the coming of the fourth industrial revolution. Industrial revolutions don't happen, they just creep upon us. In many ways, many of the changes which are foreseen in the fourth industrial revolution have already been with us for many, many years. If I look at 2012 in India, in 2012, a major strike broke out in the Suzuki manufacturing plant, which goes under the name of Maruti in India. At the Suzuki manufacturing plant, it was a very violent strike. One manager got lynched and killed. Unfortunate incident, but the response was that car makers in India then started automating their supply chains and started to move to targets. Ford, Volkswagen, Suzuki, they all went into a production cycle, they changed assembly lines to make them 99% more automated. Yes, that destroyed jobs. But then India, we see it very, very clearly that as we move into the future, see what the third industrial revolution has been doing is that the entire, it created the global value chains of manufacturing. What happened in the global value chains was that jobs, production cycles got broken up, disaggregated into small bits of components. And countries which had the comparative advantage in each section of the value chain started entering there because some started manufacturing, some started design processes, and communications enabled the integration, transportation, and entire design structure and marketing of these throughout these global value chains into the best markets in the world. Now today, the actual competition amongst nations is fundamentally about where do countries position themselves in these global value chains, because they are being transformed again. Yes, they are partly being transformed because of trade wars, but they're also being transformed because of fundamental differences taking place in the nature of manufacturing. Manufacturing itself is changing. In the world of the future, manufacturing does not really remain manufacturing. Most of the manufacturing as we know it is done automatically. Manufacturing fundamentally becomes a service. When you move on to additive manufacturing, other kinds of services. So countries like India start seeing a certain opportunity, which countries which grew on the services sector see a certain opportunity where they can use knowledge power to get into the new disrupted global chains which are now going to be created as a result of the changes taking place in the world of manufacturing. But what does this do? What it also does, what we've been seeing over the last few years, as global value chains wrote themselves out, we saw economic inequality between nations actually decrease. New countries came out, they started emerging, the income gap started closing between nations. But unfortunately, within nations, inequality started increasing. And it is the result of increasing inequality within nations that has led to the kind of tumult you see across the world. where you're seeing disruption in the youth out in the streets protesting. The protests are happening not just in West Asia, the protests are happening in Latin America, protests are happening in France, protests are happening in the US, the Occupy Wall Street movement after 2008. These protests are very, very real. And governance, policy making has to find the right answers to these kinds of protests. Because the technology divide, and it's a very real divide. The technology divide is a divide which not just widens with every shifting year, it's a divide which actually deepens. It deepens with every passing phase of technology. And the technology wars which are now seeing happening between the major powers are basically a battle to position along the right place in the global value chains in the years of the future. So yes, there is going to be a contest between nations, countries which can fashion the right policies, the right governance tools, societies which can give the right responses and actually be able to bridge the digital divide within their own societies are going to prosper more. And now that is a real challenge for the developing world. How do you bridge the technology divide? The technology divide exists across gender. The technology divide exists across various sections of society. It exists between rural and urban. And as I said, the technology divide gets worse and worse every time there's a shift in technology. Every time we shift from 2G to 3G, it happens. When you're 3G, you shift to 5G, it is again going to happen. It's a simple matter of saying technology is empowering. Yes, technology empowers. Technology places power in everybody's hands. But the fact is, it depends on what kind of a smartphone you have in your hand. Ultimately, your access to health, your access to education is going to depend on what kind of device you hold in your hands, what kind of service your area actually attains, whether you are accessing it on a broadband connection, a satellite connection, or on a lumbering 2G, 3G connection. So there are challenges for the world, and how we face them is going to be interesting. I can come in later about it.
Thank you for that overview. That's really important. And now we're going to talk a little bit further about not just that divide deepening, but the inequality as it really kind of finds itself in the gender area. And I think what's actually interesting here at this panel, how the women on the ends of the stage, we're in the power positions on the stage, right, Ms. Fernández de la Vega. And so I'd hope that you could give us some more insights into gender inequality and how technology can help patch that, if you will, if that's a good pun, to get us into the future and to, stabilize and create more opportunities, not just for technology to improve societies, but improve opportunities for women and other, minorities, ethnic minorities as well. If you could give us some more insights.
Bueno, pues muchísimas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this magnificent forum, and particularly in this talk around such a relevant issue as technology, welfare, and inequality. I'm not sure whether that order was made deliberately, but this is the order on the agenda: technology, welfare, and inequality. So I do believe that this is indeed a topic that's all the rage. It's also a strategic issue, and particularly for the society as a whole, for both men and women, but particularly it's a very important and critical issue for women. New technologies are now part of our present, and more they are becoming part of our present life, and they will continue to be our future. They affect everything we do, our personal lives, our political lives, our economical life, social life, etc. They are everywhere. So from that angle, their importance is paramount. The first question that comes up then, and that I can think of, is, are these technologies going to help us, these technologies which are everywhere, to deepen into these issues? Are they going to help us promote welfare? We all know that we live in a very fractured world where we see lots of inequalities. Are they going to help us then to improve equality? Are they going to help us improve and make progress in terms of democracy when we talk about the network, the connected world, and what have you. But the big challenge ahead of us is to know whether values such as dignity, humanity, solidarity, equality, which are the values that sustained human rights, which have in turn been the major progress of humanity, they have configured the major progress in history of humanity, whether this is going to be spread with the same immediateness and quality through that network, through the net as we know it. If we don't have human rights, if we do not have all those values that have allowed us to make progress, then we'll start having a big problem and a major issue. And this is something that we must think about at all times. We need to ensure that these values will continue to be there and they will continue to improve our lives, because otherwise we will have lots of technologies available, but inequality will remain to be there. And I do believe, honestly, that it is us women who are in the better place to make sure that these values are also conveyed through the new technologies, because we have been the best allies for these issues. We know for a fact, and we have been told since the moment we are born, and particularly through technologies, we can also see that when you want to make progress in your knowledge, in your expertise, in your education, you become free. So we know that that progress is absolutely essential, and we want to make sure that the progress we have made, that there is no way back in these times that we are actually living. And that when we talk about technology and progress, we must be sure that we are on the right path towards equality, a kind of equality that has not been there yet, let's say. And when we think about improving society without having the women on board, it's totally out of this world. It's just not possible. It's something that cannot be sustained. We, therefore, need to take the necessary steps to include women. But for that to be a reality, we need to be in other areas, in the knowledge generation structures, because that structure that generates knowledge is what's going to be there at the technology. In other words, the values that are around currently are the main values which are not based on equality but on inequality. We still have a structure, a social structure, where women are not really part of things. We have not contributed in generating knowledge. I looked at some statistics not so long ago, and I could see that the progress from 2013 to 2017, the participation of women in all that progress in knowledge, we went from being accountable for 11% to be 11.6%. So that's our contribution in all those years. That's the world average. But if we look at the developed countries, the improvement, for lack of a better term, was from 29.9% to 32%. So that's 2 percentage points. We have not made much progress, have we, when it comes to the presence of women in the contribution of knowledge, and we continue to reproduce topics and structures that are the inheritance of the patriarchal structures, and therefore we maintain the old model untouched. It is not a model that promotes the integration of women. It is not a model that allows women to convey their values. All the reverse. We still have a model that makes a clear difference between technological methodology and social cultural context. Technology does absorb the social cultural model. that there is. And it reproduces that model and it increases the model. It is good to increase things, but let's try to increase a model that does not promote more inequality. There is something that is not working. This is clear, and that's the question, that's the issue that we have ahead of us. The knowledge generation model or structure is riddled with gender-based models that exclude women from those very processes. And women are now only a small minority in technological and IT responsibilities or jobs. And this is something, again, that's just history repeating, isn't it? I'm sure that most of you have used certain technological aids, such as Siri, Alexa, and what have you. Those Google, and by the way, they're all women, they're all girls, aren't they? And the group of experts have constructed that technological personality or character with the aim of giving the user certain warmth in their service. It is a purely feminine thing. It is something that's related to a model, a very clear model, and those devices are normally Western, young women with a very warm personality and voice in order to convey something that's really pleasant to the user. And this is not a pure coincidence, and it's not really uncalled for. It is based on a model that has put men at the top and women at the bottom of that scale. Feminization of those voice-prompted devices is the result of a discrimination model based on gender. And this becomes even worse at IT companies. Apple, Amazon are managed by men. This is the reality. And in the higher ranks and structures, in the hierarchies, there are very few women. Maybe if there would be more women there, things would definitely be different. But they did something else which has to be known to the world. They developed these voice-prompted devices on the basis of studies that they conducted, and that says that customers or users of these technologies prefer a woman's voice rather than a man's voice. This is the studies that they carried out, when we have older studies that actually say and conclude that users do prefer a different voice from their own gender. I.e., if you're a man, you prefer a woman, and the other way around. But there are now other studies that apparently say that all users prefer a woman's voice. Well, this is not the case. But anyway, this is just a token that shows how technologies are conveying a model. And this is a source of great concern to me. And I do think that we need to demand we need to say clearly that there is no welfare without equality, and there is no progress without equality. This is something that we all know, but the model still, we have not been able to modify that model, to change the model. And if we want to not be excluded anymore, we need to work around knowledge, and do so very thoroughly, because this is where we find most of the prejudices. This is where the prejudices are really taking root. And we need to be aware that we cannot break that if we use the same knowledge model. And knowledge is the basis for everything. We just need to look at the statistics. Now we have a very powerful discourse. We say that women need to study more science, more technology, all the discourse around the STEMs. And I think that's all very good. The figures are there. You can just read, and I do invite you to read the figures from a UNESCO report. It's called Deciphering Inequality Around the Access to Technology. It's something like that. But the challenge is we need to set off from a premise that is never looked at, and that's the fact that women we have already positioned ourselves in other very important areas, which is sometimes underestimated, such as, for example, social science and humanities. Here, we already have a leading position and a leading role, and this is not only bad, but on the contrary, it is very good. As new technologies expand, we also need to convey not only the technologies but also the values. Because if you teach a child if you teach them just technology, they will be better prepared to compete in the world of the economy. But I'm not sure. I very much doubt they will be prepared in humanities, in social science, to have critical thought, to be sympathetic, and to understand injustice. These are values without which you cannot be successful in the world. Therefore, this is the challenge. The challenge is knowing and being aware that we are in a situation of very deep inequality, that the model is still being conveyed as is through technologies, and that therefore, whether we make a battle, we fight a battle to change this, or we are heading the wrong way. And we are heading the wrong way because we cannot really do without women. We cannot afford to leave women out. And I'll give you an example. Africa. It is clear that I am passionate about Africa. There's no denying that. I think that Africa is a wonderful continent, such an immense continent, and we have so much to learn from Africa that we should take a more of a listening instance instead of talking too much. And it is clear that in Africa, it is women that are the main powerhouse. It is the main engine that makes things move on the continent. Well, that's the situation. Did you know that there are loads and loads of wonderful scientists, women scientists in Africa? When I started thinking, in my country we have rather advanced science activities. We started thinking about the possibility of hiring African female scientists. People used to ask me, but are there such a thing? Are there women scientists? I said, well, yes, there are many of them. And they said, well, we don't know one, not even one. And I said, well, that's the problem. They are not known. We need to take them out from where they are. And you cannot imagine the 70 female scientists that have been already in Spain doing research in areas which are taking the world by storm, by the way. And it is important for the rest of the scientific community to know this from a very young woman. I can see my friend, former minister of Senegal, Aminata Touré, a young scientist, a young lady who made a great impact because her research project was about investigating the impact of the monsoon using a mathematical formula. And she came to Spain to do that research. She visited the ICMA, the Mathematics Institute in Madrid. It is a very, world-renowned center, and she is such a, she's ace, really. She's fantastic, and everybody wanted to work with her. She has opened a path in research related to climate change, which is absolutely outstanding. I can also mention a Moroccan woman. She's also fabulous. She's working. She just arrived in Spain. She's conducting certain research, which is absolutely unprecedented, related to the impact of algae in Morocco. Well, to keep it short, people, even women coming from countries which are undergoing a war, for example, Sudan, we are entering the areas of knowledge, but we need to be present, and there are still very few of them. And this is because they don't have the opportunities to start off. So whether we make technologies convey values and put us in an equal position with relation to technology and knowledge, or this will not work. I am optimistic. I believe if we fail to do this now, we will need to do it sooner or later, and it will be the women who we will do it. There is no other option. This is not only good for us women, but also for the humanity as a whole. There is such talent. There is so much talent, and you know what? It's just a question of justice. And here, more than anywhere else, whether we know for a fact that we need to reinvert the gender-based difference and inequality that is present throughout the world, or this will not work at all. And we need to do this because there is a natural predisposition and natural intelligence of women to be where we are still not present. And if we want 21st century to be a peaceful, there will not be peace, there will not be progress and welfare without women, because if there is no equality, there is no welfare, and equality must be the first and foremost thing. Thank you.
I have just 2 minutes left, and I want to use that 2 minutes wisely. So I'm going to ask the panel to think of, and thank you so much for those comments, the end note that I would like you each to consider is, what can the folks in this room do? And you touched upon optimism and being optimistic about this conversation around technology, welfare, and inequality. So quickly, if the panelists could think of just 10 seconds of what the folks gathered in this room can do as we move this conversation forward. And then with the other 30 seconds, I'm so interested to take one question. But that one question can only be a 10-second question, and the answer can only be a 20-second response by one panelist. So quickly, one question.
Yeah, my name is Mubarak. I'm from Senegal. You have talked about technology, but not innovation, nurturing from within Africa. So if you can proceed. I think if we have to benefit from technology, also innovation within Africa is important. Thank you.
Innovation.
Yes, I do a link between actually innovation and technology. Innovation comes from science and a lot of thinking out of the box. So in Africa, innovation is not only in technology. Innovation is just in organization also. Innovation is also today showing as a way of banking, for instance, as a way of doing politics. So in Africa, in my opinion, research center and innovation are what is missing also, what is lacking. I was just mentioning that the area where Africa is really lacking behind is on research, on science, on innovation and technology. And that's the reason why, for me, if you want to grow in the field of petrol and gas knowledge, if you want to grow in the field of medicine, of agriculture, of industry, there's no other way than innovation, than technology, than also science mastering. And I would like just to give an example of the effect of lack of innovation and lack of technology. Senegal has just discovered gas and petrol, you know about this. Today, we don't have the means for research and development on the petrol exploration. We have to bring in BP from UK, Exxon also, Total. And this is really a typical example why the Western world and the African world, where we have really a big gap of inequality now. This is a scientific and technological inequality, and we must solve this. But Africa will not expect that the Western world help to do that. Africa must do that itself. We must make sure that we master how to do research on petrol and gas, how to do research on new seed, how to do research on drones and so on, how to manufacture cars, planes and so on. That's what China did. So I really love the fact that here we are really pointing out the real issues. And what I just wanted to ask everybody from this room to think about is how can we impact that? How can we impact the mastering of technology, of innovation, of science in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, I would say in the developing world. And we all know the solution, but we just need now policymakers, university people, the ministers and so on. We need to make sure that we enforce that.
So just with a few moments left, Ms. Fernández de la Vega, what can we move this conversation forward?
No, yo voy a señalar que
I'd say that in the innovation field, women are also crucial. I can also tell you that one of the major reasons why you should choose a women, of course, should be the innovative feature of their projects. And I can tell that Africans, they have such innovation. Why? Because these are investigations, research done with a specific approach, dealing with global issues, but trying to find local solutions within an international framework. That's what African corporations are trying to do. They're trying to deal with, let's say, global issues at the scientific level, but they're at the same time trying to find local solutions with their own resources, while using an international, let's say, methods, a standard, international standard that is agreed upon everyone across the planet. And this is what you have to do if you want to be competitive. And this is what female investigators, researchers are doing in your countries, in your African countries. There are lots of them that are already working in these fields, and there are other ones upcoming. And we have got to support them. Not even in my organization, we, in the last competition we organized, we had 200 applications. All of them were impressive, I can tell you. So please help me, you Africans, help me try to integrate all these African women. I know you're doing lots of efforts, but we can do much more.
Wrap up words to share with the group?
Yeah. On the question of innovation, technology fundamentally empowers, it enables. How does it empower and enable? I was having this very interesting conversation with the innovation labs working out of IIT Mumbai, which fundamentally they built a platform which allow young innovators to come in and create their own applications and services. And the amazing thing which they found was that the most winning applications, which won the best prizes, did not come from the best institutions in the country. They did not come from the institutes of technology. They came from small town polytechnics. Now, there is a lot of skill, there's a lot of talent, which has not been recognized by our current educational systems because they are still stuck in the hierarchies of power of information. Now, what technology does, it disrupts that hierarchy of information. It universalizes information. Now, that is the power of technology. So, my last message to everyone in this room, you asked me what we should be thinking of. Don't ever be dismissive. Be open. And next time we have this conversation, let us get some 25-year-olds on this side of the panel and listen to them.
Thank you. Mr. Boccara, last thoughts?
On innovation, I'll just propose an innovative way to think about thinking. It may seem that we have disagreement, and obviously technology is so powerful that it will lead to anxieties, disagreement, possibilities for some, and inequalities, and so on. So what I would like you to invite you is to think, like when I expressed my own view, what was I saying? I wasn't talking about my views. There's no such thing. I was positioning myself on a space, the social space where thinking takes place. Thinking is essentially a social phenomenon. And I was just using myself or used as an instrument to express views on behalf of the group. So as you see, when you approach thinking as a social phenomenon, and each can position himself or herself on different parts of that space. And of course, we can position one time in a space and another part we can be in another space, moving, for example, from negative views to positive views, from pessimism or anxiety to optimism. As we position like this, there will be a decreased propensity for conflict, decreased propensity for feeling, I own that view, therefore I need to defend it. So I'll conclude that I don't have a view, and I shouldn't have a view, because that's narcissistic withdrawal. I was only speaking on behalf of the group and offering a position that we all own. And I own everything that was said because we're part of a group, and it's a group that we're going to affront and deal with technology.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you for coming, and thank you all for participating. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we take a quick group photo?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation this morning. We will now break for lunch and reconvene at 2:30. Please enjoy your meal.